So you want a Suzuki GSX-8R. Interesting choice. The laid-back, not-so-sporty Gixxer might seem like an anomaly for Suzuki now, but it's right at home at the new parallel twin Japanese party. And while that might sound like a euphemism for what goes on at the Weeaboo Furry Convention in Tampa, Florida every year, it actually represents something beyond the typical bold new graphics strategy that Suzuki has pretty infamously employed over the last 2 decades. Also, I'm pretty sure the Venn diagram for weeaboos and furries is just one circle overlapped. The 776cc parallel twin found in the 8R and 8S is Suzuki's first clean sheet engine design in over 20 years because everything else up until this point has been derivative on older engine platforms. So does it still have legendary Suzuki build quality and reliability? Is it a solid motorcycle, and who should actually buy one of these? Well, lucky for you, I have extensive seat time with this platform, having owned and modified one back in early 2024 as a giveaway motorcycle. I logged over 1,000 miles with the model we had in that pretty snazzy Pearl Ignite yellow color. I've let my thoughts about this bike simmer and marinate over the last 2 years, and having sampled all of its competitors, I've come to one conclusion. The GSX-8R is the most mature, well-developed, and cohesive of all the new, not-so-sporty middleweight bikes in 2026. It's a bit of an old-school flavor in a new-school setup, because before college hunks and flip-flops were turning themselves into meat crayons on their Gixxers in the 2000s, Suzuki's claim to fame was building bulletproof, heavyweight bikes. Remember those 2 words, bulletproof and heavyweight, because that's the core DNA of Suzuki. I mean, think about it. The GT750 Water Buffalo from the 70s, the Bandit 1200, the Hayabusa, for God's sake. As much as we like to think Suzuki builds screaming inline 4s for buyers with room temperature IQs and credit scores low enough that a toddler could count them, they actually have decades of core competency in building bikes exactly like the GSX-8R. So, while you might bemoan the fact that the 8R is nowhere near a Gixxer 750, it's in fact the exact sort of bike Suzuki is really good at building, and it kinda shows. Let's start with what's probably your biggest concern about this platform. Just how much of a pig is this thing? The GSX-8R clocks in at 452 pounds ready to ride. It's got a longer wheelbase than every other bike in the category. The ergonomics are large and roomy, and to be honest, the more I describe it, the more I realize why it's such a popular bike in the United States. This bike's proportions are nearly identical to a Ninja 500, except it's about 25% larger in every way. And for a street rider who wants something competent, easy to ride, and planted, this is the move. Heavyweight indeed. The parallel twin found in this motorcycle is par for the course in 2026, with a 270 crank pushing 82 ponies and 58 foot-pounds of torque, but it does have a few tricks up its sleeve, crucially with the cross-balancer shaft, which smooths out secondary vibrations, making this bike really silky smooth to ride. Fun fact, this engine traces its lineage back to 2013, when Suzuki had a 585cc turbocharged parallel twin concept called the Recursion. Man, that's pretty sweet. Over the years, Suzuki decided that was way too cool, and they dropped the turbo, increased the displacement, and made it just more normal, and it ended up as this parallel twin that we have today. Did you know that they also wanted to create an inline 6 Hayabusa at one point? There is an alternate dimension somewhere out there where Suzuki built these bikes, and that's the timeline I want to live in. In any case, the 8R's parallel twin provides ample grunt for the bike. Suzuki's fueling and throttle feel is decidedly old school, which is not a bad thing. This bike doesn't really suffer from the kind of flat spots, neutered power output, or other weirdness of several of its contemporaries have suffered as the hands of Euro 5 plus emissions have taken hold. You know, bikes like the ZX-4RR, the Honda Hornet 750, they're all kind of weird with the fueling from the factory. I'm not sure how Suzuki gets away with it, but the power output is smooth, linear, and just feels great. If you want, you can put a full system exhaust and flash the ECU for a nice bump in power. People tend to see a 7 to 10% increase in power. It's pretty widely reported. I actually did that same setup on ours back in 2024, and it ran pretty well. It sounded pretty cool too. So when you combine the punchy engine that delivers smooth power and that long and smooth handling, the bike doesn't feel fat or sluggish. It just feels confident, stable, planted. Suzuki ships this bike with Showa's separate function fork with the big piston. They call it the SFFBP for short. These units are really common in a lot of bikes nowadays. The ZX-4RR comes with them, and so does the Trident 800, for example. But the specific unit in the 8R is totally non-adjustable, which kind of a bummer at this price point. Let me put it to you this way. In regards to the handling, if you've ever ridden something like a Honda VFR 800, the GSX-8R has very similar characteristics, although without the sonorous tones of a V4. We should bring back V4s that make normal amounts of power. I kind of want a V4 soundtrack that isn't ballistically fast. A guy can dream, right? Okay, next concern. Is it a beginner bike? All right, if you've been around this channel for a while, you know that I love to talk about what is or isn't a beginner bike. And like many things in life, that concept can depend on a lot of factors. But speaking in broad terms, the GSX-8R is probably the absolute limit of what I'd be comfortable putting a beginner rider on who's maybe a little bit older, responsible, and mature. For your average young 20-something with no motorcycle experience, this bike is probably not a good idea. It's a very large, full-sized bike with lots of torque. That's not a good recipe. But for someone who is maybe 30 years old, has some sense of self-preservation, it can be done. The GSX-8R comes with a pretty simple form of traction control that is ignition-based. And what that means is that all it does is cut timing when it senses that the rear wheel speed is faster than the front wheel speed. So it doesn't have a super sophisticated 6-axis IMU system like the R7 or the Daytona 660, for example. Now those will help keep riders more safe, but without cornering ABS or advanced systems, I think you should keep your wits about you with this bike. I'm not saying it's unsafe, I'm just saying it's not as polished or sanitized as what we're seeing in the category these days. Also, a really weird thing Suzuki omitted with this bike is cruise control. It would have been a total layup. The bike already has ride-by-wire, they have cruise control on their other models. I have no idea why they didn't include it, especially when you consider how comfortable and nice this bike is to ride. I personally ended up installing an Atlas throttle lock on the one that I had, and it did the job pretty well. I was able to lock the throttle, get my hands off the bars, enjoy the cruise control function. It does come with a 5-inch TFT and a bidirectional quick shifter, which is nice, and at $9,699, it's priced right in line with other bikes in the category. But if it's your first bike and you're a beginner, you should expect to spend a little over $11,000 out the door to get it, which can be a little spicy for people. So we've established it has that heavyweight vibe that a classic Suzuki should. So what about reliability and bulletproof? Does it actually live up to that? Well, this is where the meme truly becomes reality. So the other day, I might have accidentally discovered a brand new way to motovlog. It seems like every other week, some motorcycle content creator is coming up with groundbreaking innovations in the space, but I haven't really seen this before, and it all happened because of a mistake that I made. When I forgot my helmet mount for my Action 6 on my recent trip to Iceland, I discovered that you can actually use the Osmo Nano's hat clip on the chin curtain of your helmet, and it works. As far as I can tell, it looks really close to what the Action 6 produces, which is really impressive, and it weighs a lot less. You get a 143-degree field of view, 4K resolution at a max of 60 frames per second, and a built-in storage with a 1/1.3-inch sensor, which gives you a really nice dynamic range. It also seamlessly links up to the mic mini like the Action 6, so you get perfect audio, and you pop off the multi-function dock, press record, store it in your pocket, and you're ready to go. This is a really cool solution if you don't want to have anything permanently attached to your helmet, you're not that interested in vlogging all the time, and you don't want to rock a heavier camera on your lid. You simply clip it on, sync it up with the mic mini, and you're done. You get pretty sweet POV footage. And in case you don't believe me, it was battle tested in Iceland riding up to 120 kph with 40 kph crosswinds, and it never came off. It's kind of a sturdy little hat clip. Click the link down below and check out everything DJI has to offer and get yourself an Osmo Nano. I've been really loving this camera and I think it's pretty cool. Now let's get back to the show. As remarkable as it might seem in the age of Kawasaki ZX-6Rs blowing up, cracked MT09 frames, and Hondas spilling out their guts through their oil lines, Suzuki soldiers on with virtually no issues. The GSX-8R in particular has zero, and I mean zero, widely reported issues. And it makes sense. Suzuki moves in this very deliberate, slow, methodical way. They're not pumping out new engines every 6 months like CF Moto. They've been building motorcycles in their Hamamatsu factory for over 70 years, and they follow a philosophy that's more akin to Toyota's Kaizen philosophy of incremental development and change to existing practices. And for as critical as I am of Suzuki, and even though they're not my preferred manufacturer, I gotta give credit where credit is due. If you're looking for a motorcycle that is completely bomb-proof, Suzuki really should be at the top of your list. They might not have the fanciest features, they might not have the latest tech, although rumor has it that they're wanting to put variable valve timing and winglets on the GSX-250R, which would be very funny and a little misguided. But my God, do Suzukis just work. It's refreshing in an age where so many things are updated over the air or you get locked out of using your own devices, and in general, we're just following the trend of enshittification. Suzukis are old school, and for the right kind of buyer, that's exactly what you want. It also represents a uniquely good opportunity to purchase used because you know the bike can withstand any amount of abuse your average squid might throw at it. Okay, let's jump into the rivals and competitors section of this video because that's where you're going to want to see the advantage that the GSX-8R actually has. The closest competitor to the GSX-8R would be the Honda CBR 650R, a bike that's failed upwards in many ways because it has the same bones since 2014 and it kind of just ended up here in the category. With about 94 horsepower out of a 649cc inline 4, it revs out more than the GSX-8R and has that inline 4 scream. It is heavy at the same weight as the 8R roughly, and it fulfills a very similar purpose. It's a sensible, everyday sport bike sort of thing. But it lacks the grunty torque that the 8R has. I had a CBR 650R last year and logged a good amount of mileage with it. I even took it on track, and to be honest, it left me feeling pretty cold. The 8R feels more modern and planted, the 650R just feels very last gen. The 8R is much more fun to ride and more satisfying to use, whereas the 650R just feels a little lazy. The Suzuki plays a cool trick in that it is heavy, but it's still fun. The 650R isn't a particularly fun motorcycle, but it makes the right noises. So if you like inline 4s and you gotta have that sound, then it might be the right bike for you. Otherwise, I would probably stick with the Suzuki. Not something you hear me say very often. Another natural competitor for the 8R would be Kawasaki's Ninja 650. In many ways, it's the original, comfy, sort of sporty bike for entry-level riders. The Kawasaki is quite a bit cheaper, and the engine is smaller, and it has a traditional 180-degree crank, giving it the lawnmower sound that people really love to hate, myself included. And it was always seen as Kawasaki's way of selling something to people who thought that their baby Ninja wasn't quite good enough. Well, in 2026, it's starting to look really long in the tooth. With the Ninja 500 being such a great bike at such a great price, the 650 doesn't really make a lot of sense. And I'll be completely honest, the GSX-8R wipes the floor with the Ninja 650. It's much more powerful, more torquey, produces a nicer sound, it's more well balanced, the engine is nicer, and it's just way more fun to ride. Also, it looks cooler too. The Ninja 650 is truly an overpriced, unnecessary addition in Kawasaki's lineup, and it's long overdue for a revamp. I wonder if Kawi is going to do anything to compete in this new age Japanese parallel twin category, but until they do, this bike will continue being a giant miss. Just ride these two back to back and tell me that you'd actually want to own the 650. You'd be lying, and you know it. And finally, we have the Triumph Daytona 660, a relatively new platform and concept from Triumph. It's been recently updated to have 94 ponies out of a 660cc 3-cylinder engine, and with a slightly lower weight and a little bit more advanced tech, this should be on your short list if you like the vibe of the GSX-8R, but you can't stomach a parallel twin. The Daytona 660 revs out to nearly 12,000 RPM, and the triple sounds great doing it, but it retains a solid amount of torque given that it's not an inline 4. It feels a little more budget than the Suzuki, and it doesn't have the same touring-ready workhorse nature of the 8R, but it's a damn good motorcycle. Ultimately, it would come down to feel between these two, and for me, since I have an irrational emotional attachment to the Daytona name, and I would feel like riding a Daytona 660 would be anathema to my entire existence, I would go with the Suzuki, just so I didn't have to put up with that. I also remember having more fun riding the 8R than the Daytona, but again, that might just be down to my irrational feelings. So what about the R7 Yam or the RS660? Well, I'll be honest, I don't really consider those direct competitors to the 8R. They're substantially lighter, about 50 pounds lighter than the Gixxer, and their intended use case in theory is 50% road and 50% track. And in the case of the RS660, it's a lot more expensive. They're all parallel twin sport bikes, but the execution, feel, and use case between the 8R, the RS660, and the R7 are just wildly different. Again, it's a case of riding them back to back. One of them will feel like a solid street bike that you can use for nearly anything, and the other two just kind of feel like pokey sport bikes that you need to prod and wring out to have fun with. Which brings me to a separate point. Is this bike at all capable of running on a racetrack? In short, yes, but it's not really worth it to do at the enthusiast level. Let me explain. Although 99% of GSX-8R owners will never take their bike to the track, you're watching the AmiNoob channel, and I love track day stuff, so I thought it would be worth discussing why it's not a great idea to convert it or try to change it into a track-going motorcycle. Starting with the 452-pound weight and non-adjustable suspension, that's not a great combination from the factory. You're already going to have to fight those factors right off the bat. Other models, like the R7 or the RS660, have fully adjustable suspension units. The RS660 actually even comes in factory trim with Öhlins front and rear if you want, and they're way lighter weight. You can start with those platforms bone stock and get them to behave and perform pretty well on track, all the way up to, I'd say, upper level of intermediate pace. Beyond that, the GSX-8R fundamentally does not have the correct geometry from the factory to perform well on track. Race teams in Moto America run the GSX-8R largely through sponsor obligations, but they have to make some pretty wild and dramatic changes to make it work well. In short, while I always recommend taking whatever bike you have on track, I'm a big believer in run what you brung, but I think the Suzuki GSX-8R will just let you down pretty quickly once you start building up pace and wanting to go a little faster. It's just not what the bike was really intended to do, despite the marketing materials you see from Moto America or certain press releases. So let's wrap this up and really consider who this bike is for. Who should own a GSX-8R? The 8R is simply a solid commuter. It's an old school vibe, built by a legendary Japanese company with a track record of bulletproof reliability. If you're looking for a dependable, planted, stable bike that has a grunty engine that is enjoyable to use on road, this is your bike. It's low on frills, farkles, and nonsense, which is honestly refreshing in today's world. It's styled like a classic Suzuki GSX-R product, but it's friendly and comfortable to use. And that doesn't make it remarkably different over the competition, but the difference is in the execution. The people at Suzuki are masters at building incredibly solid motorcycles that will churn miles, usually in spite of how owners treat their bikes. I mean, look at Suzuki's reputation in endurance world racing. It's pretty remarkable. If you want something you know is going to turn on and work every single day, has a ton of pedigree and legacy behind it, then it's a great choice. And hey, if you want it in a naked bike, Suzuki will sell you the 8S for a little bit less money too. It's got all the same fundamental bones, but with a different fork and no fairings. Also, I suppose they have the GSX-8T and Double T models, but I'm not a huge fan of those, as you guys might know. The styling just looks a little off to me. I imagine someone owning the 8R as their daily rider, maybe their weekend twisties carvers, and maybe even their Instagram clout bike given the styling. It's a great single bike option for someone who just wants to do road duty stuff in a fully fared package. It's a cool bike, and it surprised me when I had it, and I think they've got a big winner on their hands, and I think that's why they sell pretty well. What do you guys think about the GSX-8R? Would you get one? Do you have one? Sound off in the comments down below. I always love hearing from you guys. I really appreciate you watching this one all the way to the end. I'll catch you in the next one. See you later.